welcome to the program and thank you for joining us. I want to introduce myself. I am Katie Ball. I'm a member of the Community Partner Outreach Council. And welcome to the series Fundraising and Modern Nonprofit, sponsored by the Junior League of San Diego. We are excited to welcome you to the Part 2 Grant Writing 101. We are going to announce additional sessions today after the meeting. There's one coming in late spring. Thank you to everyone for participating today. My name is, like I said, Katie. Sorry, it's my first Zoom meeting I've hosted, so sorry about this. I will be monitoring all the questions in the chat and let me know if something comes up. We'll wait till each speaker finishes and we'll ask all the questions after. I would like to introduce Shauna, our incoming president of JLSD.
Thank you, Katie, and welcome everyone. A little bit more about the Junior League of San Diego. We were founded more than 90 years ago, and JLSD, as we're known, is a network of empowered female civic leaders working with community partners to address and solve pressing issues in our communities. And we are part of an international network of 291 leagues, which comprises 150,000 women. And so I am very pleased to introduce fellow league member Renee Simpson and also co-presenter and our guest Janelle Wallace. And a little bit about Renee and Janelle. So I'll start with Renee Simpson. She is a seasoned nonprofit professional with a passion for service and experience in higher education, project management, event programming, customer service, and grants writing and research. Renee holds a BA in political science from the University of Colorado and an MA in liberal arts from the San Diego State University. In her role as grant writer, Renee researches grant prospects, writes proposals and project budgets, and maintains grant tracking systems. Renee is very involved in her community and has volunteered as a youth mentor, taught elementary art classes, and chaired various PTA committees. In her free time, Renee enjoys spending time with family and friends, traveling, yoga, biking, hiking, paddleboarding, and maintaining a home garden full of succulents and native plants. Welcome, Renee.
Thank you.
Next is Janelle Wallace. Janelle is a results-oriented fundraiser who thrives on building and deepening connections to support a shared mission. Throughout her career, Janelle has implemented more than 35 community events and launched more than 15 campaigns. She holds an MPA from the Maxwell School at Syracuse University and a BS in Business Administration from the California State University, Chico. Currently, she serves as the Development and Membership Director at the Water Conservation Garden, joining them in 2019 to help diversify and strengthen fundraising efforts. She is responsible for planning, organizing, executing, and directing all of the garden's fundraising, including major gifts, annual fundraising, plan giving, special events, grants, and capital campaigns. In her first year, fundraising goals were exceeded by 60%. She has worked for various nonprofits, including the American Lung Association, Do Something Australia, Serving Seniors, and others. In her spare time, Janelle enjoys skiing, hiking, traveling, and eating delicious sushi. So warm welcome to Renee and Janelle, and thank you so much for taking your time this afternoon.
Excited to be here.
Thank you. Okay, I think next slide. All right, perfect. So I'm Renee. I work with a few different nonprofits in San Diego as a consultant. I started my own small business 3 years ago, but I've been doing grants for over 20 years. So I work with the Water Conservation Garden. So I work directly with Janelle, and then also the Boys and Girls Club of East County and the Mitchell Thorpe Foundation. So this is just a screenshot of my website. And if you go to the next slide, then you can see a few of the projects that I've helped fund over the years. So next slide.
Hi, everyone. My name's Janelle. As Shauna mentioned in the introduction, I'm the Development and Membership Director at the Water Conservation Garden. I've been working with nonprofits for nearly 10 years, and during this time, I've had the pleasure to fundraise for many different causes such as senior homelessness, cancer research, youth development, and various environmental causes. In my role at the Garden, I'm responsible for all aspects of fundraising, donor stewardship, annual giving, corporate sponsorship, and grant management, which is what we'll be talking about today. For those of you who might not be familiar with the Water Conservation Garden, we connect people to nature to inspire the conservation of natural resources. The garden is a demonstration site with nearly 6 acres of water conservation displays and also has a robust environmental education program called Miss Smarty Plants. On the next slide, I would love to give context to our fundraising. The garden has an annual operating budget around $1 million and generates about 25 to 30% of our revenue from grants. This income has allowed the garden to deliver services to the community that otherwise would not have been possible. Grant funds have allowed us to deliver education programs, to keep our plants alive, to build a new education center, among many other things. Next slide. Nonprofits can apply for grants from government sources at local, state, and federal levels, as well as from private and public foundations. The average nonprofit generates approximately 15 to 20% of its revenue from grants. This percentage might seem small, but it adds up and is an important piece of a nonprofit's fundraising mix. In addition to raising much needed funds, grants also help nonprofits tell their story, set goals, and execute their strategy. If you're like the garden, your event revenue has come down and you might need to diversify your revenue streams to generate more income from other sources. Prior to the pandemic, the garden hosted galas, benefit concerts, and other really fun social events. However, without those revenue streams in place, we needed to adjust our budget and also make up the revenue in other areas. As your nonprofit grows, you might find it worthwhile to hire or contract someone to focus on grant research, writing, monitoring, and reporting. There's both pros and cons that come with grants. Grants can take a significant amount of time to develop and secure. They may also come with restrictions on how those funds can be spent. So you'll want to work closely with your finance team to track your spending. On the other hand, grants can be an important catalyst for implementing large-scale projects. They can help organizations build their organizational capacity, as well as provide emergency funding to continue important services. If you only have a few viable sources of income and those sources go away, your nonprofit is much more vulnerable. Unfortunately, many fundraising professionals learned this the hard way when the pandemic hit. Looking at your overall fundraising mix and incorporating grants can help diversify your revenue streams and reduce uncertainty, especially during periods of crisis. For the next slide, I'll turn it over to Renee to talk about some of the documents you'll need to get your applications ready.
Well, congratulations if you are a newly established nonprofit or new to grant writing. Now, not everybody is ready to dive in and apply for grants immediately from the start. There are a lot of documents that you will need to round up before you can apply for grants. A lot of them are tax related, as you can see here, like your 501c3 status and your 990s from previous years. You also want to have a well-established board and a list of their affiliations and an annual budget. And the last thing a lot of funders will ask for is audited financials. It can be optional, but it's highly recommended. And they typically expect it as your organization grows bigger and you've been in business for a while. So if we could go to the next slide. This is the Parker Foundation. They are a local foundation that gives grants to a number of causes in San Diego. And in your free time, you might want to look through their website. They do a great job being very transparent with how they do business. And if you see their guidelines here in number 2, 3, and 4, they list all the documents I just mentioned, as well as a balance sheet and a profit loss statement. So this is very common, you will see. So keep in mind that you will need these documents before you apply for grants. So if we could head into the next slide. So when you're ready to dive in, you're going to need to do the research of where to find your potential funders. So the foundation directory online that is now candid is probably one of the most comprehensive ones, and you will get thousands of hits if you put in your focus area and narrow down with keywords and where you're located. So that's a great place to start if you can get access to it. Sometimes that program costs like $3,000. So as a small nonprofit, it might be tough for you to have access to it. So ask around, maybe someone else can give you a chance to see their link. But Instrumental is another one you can view at home. And I've done a 7-day trial with them and found them to be very, very useful for finding potential funders. And also just doing a Google search is not a bad idea. You can put in your focus area, your city or county, and the word grants, and a lot of hits will come up. And the San Diego Foundation, if you're not familiar with them, they are a great resource. They give out over $1 billion each year in San Diego County of grants. So the last one I wanted to mention was Grant Station, which is the one I've been using the most lately. And if we pop over to the next slide, I can show you a little bit more about how that works. So this is a pretty typical platform on how to research grants. It has a criteria that you can search for. So if you see that on the right, I put in air and water quality. And then I also put in our location of California. And on the top left, we have U.S. charitable organizations. So that I also picked that one. But I could have picked federal or state or even international if I was looking for those type of grants. So in this case, I got about 30 matches, which is a reasonable number to wade through. So if you could head to the next slide, and what I was looking for in particular was for organizations that would be willing to fund a $30,000 virtual environmental education field trip. And so I thought maybe the Adams Legacy Foundation could be a good match. And once I clicked on them, I noticed a few things that were key to look at. So they fund in Southern California, yay, because we're in San Diego. However, it looks like they tend to emphasize LA, Orange County, and Santa Barbara. And then all of their priorities fit very, very well with what we're looking for, with the exception of the part that says away from electronics. So a virtual field trip might not be that attractive to someone who wants something that's more hands-on. And then if I look over to the right where it says financial information, I can see their grant range. So they typically give between 500 and 20,000. And I'm looking for someone who might fund at 30,000. So I know if I were to put in for them, I would need to bring that number down. If we head to the next screen, I'm going to do a little more deeper dive of that organization too. So a few things that I can do is look at their 990s. So their 990, there was a link for it on the last page. That's public information, so you can look up any 990 and see where they've given in the past. It might not give you the details you're seeking, but it will show the amounts and the organizations they gave to. So I could find out that way whether they've ever given in San Diego before to the type of program I'm hoping to fund. The other things I could do is look at their website, and they might have historical summaries like the Parker Foundation does on their website. and it'll show me exactly what they've given and in what amounts. That would be super helpful. I can Google search that particular funder and see if there's been any media releases about of different projects they've funded recently. And of course, I'm going to want to look at all their social media. I'm going to look at their Facebook and their Twitter, their Instagram, all of those to get some clues as to what they typically fund. And so once I know that information, then I can reach out and feel confident when I call their program officer and want to slide some ideas by them about, hey, do you think maybe you'd want to fund this or that? And I would definitely, knowing that they only want hands-on projects, I would go back to my team at our nonprofit and say, hey, what should we ask for instead? Because I don't think virtual is going to work with these folks. So moving right along, Janelle can talk a little bit more about how you work with your team at your nonprofit.
Thanks, Renee. Well, fundraising is a team sport. When preparing for your upcoming grant application, your grant writer is like your quarterback. This person does all the research and they get all the key players in place. You'll want to work closely with your program person to identify the most fundable programs that align with your mission and your strategic plan. You'll also want to develop a plan with measurable goals and a realistic project budget. Be sure to consider how your program addresses a real community need that serves the most vulnerable populations, as this need will make your application more competitive. As Renee mentioned, having your tax and financial documents ready is an important part of any grant application. Some applications might require specific financial information. You'll want to review the application requirements very closely and work with a person on your finance team to get all the documents that you need. If you're awarded the grant, you'll also want to communicate with your finance team to make sure they know what the eligible expenses are, so that way they're coded correctly in their financial systems and you'll be able to track those expenses. Trust me, this will be helpful for pulling financial reports in the future that may be required if your project is completed. Depending on the size of your nonprofit and the size of your staff and grant you're going for, the executive director will probably be involved at some level. Your ED will likely sign the cover letter that will be a part of your grant and provide strategic input on what projects and programs are the highest priority for funding. For small nonprofits, your executive director might also be a grant writer. When the garden transitioned to a remote work environment, I want to share that I realized I was getting a lot less face time with our program staff. So I ended up implementing informal water cooler chats with the head of programs. And this has really helped us stay connected during times when we're physically apart. In addition, to better understand our organization's need, I initially asked all of our team members to put together a wish list with real costs. The total items came out to over $3 million, which I want to know is 3 times our operating budget. If your organization is like the Garden, your nonprofit probably consists of highly competent, passionate team members who want the absolute best for your organization. It's important to remember that you can do anything, but you can't do everything. Talking with your team is an important step to determine your needs, then set your priorities, and then together determine the best pathway to success. Next slide. So there's a lot of information here. This is the Garden's prospectus document for one of our programs. The Water Conservation Garden found it valuable to work with our program team to create prospectus documents around each of our programs. These documents have information about the program's purpose, how our programs are delivered, as well as the management and expertise required to implement our program. We also use SMART goals to detail how our program is evaluated and what we do to measure success, which are key elements that funders want to know. SMART goals is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. On our prospectus document, we also like to include testimonials, awards, and note other nonprofit program partnerships that we have. This document overall has been a really great, helpful tool for consolidating useful information that we can use again and again in our grant proposals. Next slide. Next, I want to stress that fundraising is all about relationships. Prior to applying for a grant, like Renee mentioned, it's a great idea to contact that program officer. Carefully review the grant guidelines and generate a list of your own questions. If it's a new potential funder, you'll want to test the waters and see if your program is a good fit. Sparking conversation is also a great way to learn more about what the funder likes to fund specifically. For example, you might go on their website and the funder shares that they like to fund environmental causes. Do they like to fund environmental education, environmental justice? Do they like to fund environmental programs for seniors, for youth, agricultural food programs? There's a lot to unpack in there. When talking to a funder, you might learn, okay, they like to fund environmental programs for seniors and youth, which the garden provides programs for both. However, that funder might share with you that they have a goal to increase their programs to seniors. In that case, the garden would put forth our program for environmental workshops with seniors because that would be the best fit. I also like to invite the funder to come down for a tour and see firsthand the impact that our programming has on the community. I also like to get more information about their giving range and ask if our range is something that they feel comfortable with. Renee highlighted the grant portals where you can see some of that research. They might even post it on their website, but I always like to check with them firsthand to see if indeed that information is correct. For example, a couple weeks ago, Renee and I met with a San Diego-based foundation who loves to provide education programs to underserved youth. On the website, they stated that their average gift size is around $20,000. However, after we met with the funder, we walked through our programs, our needs, and worked some of our board member relationships. This particular funder recommended that we apply for $30,000. This shows that you never know what you might learn during your conversations. Developing these types of relationships isn't only important for your initial grant application, but it can be important for sustaining long-lasting relationships that can turn into year-over-year funding. When working on your application, you'll want to start early and make sure you have all your documents in order. I usually skim the entire application before I even start, just to see what requirements might take more time, and I start with those items first. For example, some applications might require letters of support from stakeholders, so you'll have to reach out to them and wait for them to return those letters, or they might request specific financial documents. In that case, you might have to reach out to a different department to get the information that you're required to submit. It is best practice, once as you get all your documents in order, to submit your application well in advance. If you wait until the last minute, you could experience technical difficulties that prevent you from submitting your application on time, which could disqualify you. You'll want to leave adequate time to troubleshoot any potential problems come up and make sure that you make it into the pile for consideration. Last, but certainly not least, you'll want to go after grants that are the best fit, which I know Renee has touched on. Grant funders typically have different philanthropic giving areas that determine what nonprofits they align with. So you want to do your research and use some of those tools that Renee spoke about earlier to make sure your mission and the funder's mission are aligned. You can also usually check on their website for a list of past awardees, search social media sites, as well as media releases to get more information. Check for synergy with your values, mission, and your vision for the long term. The next step is to see if their available funding matches with your project or program needs. Every grant and every funder is different, so it's important that you do your homework to make sure you're spending your time in the area that's going to make the greatest impact. Next, I'll turn it over to Renee to talk about record keeping.
All right, record keeping, really exciting stuff. When we looked at, Janelle showed you the prospectus for the Miss Smarty Plants program. That is a great document to have for every one of your most fundable programs. And you can draw from that, copy and paste from it into creating your proposal for a specific funder. You might find that you need to modify it a lot based on different word counts and their priorities. There's some things you might want to highlight more with different funders. So that's great to have. It's also good to have a master document that has all of the information about your organization, who's on the board, the executive director, your address, contact info, because time and time again, you're going to need to copy and paste that into online applications. I'd say 90% of applications these days are online, if not more. But make sure you save that, whatever you submit to them, that you're saving it offline before you're putting it online, so that you'll have that saved and ready to go to refer to when they call you back and want to know more about it. So the other thing that I keep is a calendar with potential funders and due dates. Some of them might be due they might just have a once a year opportunity to apply with them, or maybe they'll have it 4 times a year. So if it's 4 times a year, I'll put them in the four different months that you're available to apply with them. And also a nice thing that we do at the garden is we keep all the attachments up to date. So our, most up to date board member list, our most up to date 990, it's all in a folder, really easily to access when it's time to add those as attachments. And if we can go to the next slide, I just wanted to show you a sample spreadsheet I use. So I have 3 different clients I work with. So I have one of these for each client, and it has the names of the organizations that we are intending to apply to, their due dates, what we're going to apply to, whether it's Miss Smarty Plants or some other program, how much we plan to request, and then the status. That's always what I look at every Monday morning to see what I need to do this week for that application, whether I still have some work to do. And then I added recently the last column that has the login info, because username and passwords, you're just creating those all the time. And so it's really nice to have it on one master document so you can refer back to that. And if we could go to the next slide. So a couple ways to increase your chances, and I know Janelle touched on some of this already, but if you are interested in strengthening your chances, applying with local funders is going to be much more successful than international or national grants. That does not mean that you should never apply for international or national. I've actually had some success with organizations on the East Coast that I never would have expected, and it worked out. So but for example, if the city of El Cajon is giving a grant for environmental programs, we're one of the few organizations in the area that focus on that. So our chances with them are so much greater than if we're applying to the Coca-Cola Foundation, which is going to be receiving thousands of proposals from across the world. So another thing, Janelle touched on this too, but make sure that you're not just an okay fit, but that you're a really great fit, and that they fund in your area, not only your geographical area, but your focus area. And if you can't develop a proposal that's a great fit, then maybe it's best to just pass on applying for this organization because you don't want to waste your time or anyone else's. So, oh, and then I had on here to also keep in mind your word counts. You know, sometimes if you go over, that might count against you, and so you definitely want to do everything. They're scoring. They have committees who are scoring every single section of your proposal, and so you want to get the maximum amount of points. And the best way to do that is to stay within word counts, answer the questions exactly as they ask them. Don't forget any piece of it. And then also proofreading. If you haven't used the website Grammarly, I highly recommend it, not just for grant writing, but any kind of writing you do, because it will show you where all your mistakes are and sometimes have suggestions and how to better structure your sentences. So moving right along, we're going to turn it back to Janelle.
All right. Well, there are many resources available to expand your network and your skill set. We have listed some of these resources on the slide. I won't go through them all, but we'll highlight a few, like the Association of Fundraising Professionals, which is also known as AFP. They are a wonderful professional resource that have webinars, events, and message boards where fundraising professionals can learn and grow from each other. I've also been a part of the Grant Roundtable, which is led by the development manager over at Urban Corps. It's a wonderful monthly get-together where they invite funders to the meetings so you can get better insights into what they're looking for in their upcoming grant cycles. There's also Fundraising Fridays by the Leech Tag Foundation. This is a great weekly get-together where colleagues can ask questions and get advice on fundraising best practices and learn from other development professionals. Then I would be remiss if I did not mention Junior League of San Diego, who work to develop leaders and coordinate workshops like the one we're in right now. Be sure to subscribe to their newsletter so you can stay up to date on upcoming learning opportunities. Then another great way to keep your pulse on your industry is to get to know your closest cousins. By this, we mean other similar organizations in your network. For the Water Conservation Garden, we check in with San Diego Botanic Garden, the Japanese Friendship Garden at Balboa Park, and other local gardens and other local environmental organizations. I follow them on social media, I subscribe to their e-newsletters, I browse their websites, and even reach out to them occasionally when questions come up. A strong network can give you insights into trends, spark new ideas, and can be vital really overall to your career development. Next, I'm going to turn it back over to Renee to go over some terminology.
All right, so if you are new to the field, as I was many years ago, there were some acronyms that I kept coming across and didn't know what they meant. So I wanted to throw those out here. So FY usually stands for fiscal year, and most nonprofits' fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. And LOI is a letter of intent, and it summarizes a program or project that you can send to a funder initially. Sometimes they'll just ask for an LOI so they can review it quickly and see what you're doing and decide whether to invite you to do a full proposal. And this is kind of a win-win for both of you so that you're not spending a lot of time creating a full proposal when it's unlikely that it'll get funded. And usually if they invite you back to do a full proposal, your chances are pretty good. So it's always nice when you hear they want you to come back. Request for proposal, that is often something you'll hear in federal grant guidelines, and it basically just means they're seeking proposals and their guidelines will be included there. Sustainability. So many funders want to see that they're not the only ones funding your program and that your program is going to last well beyond the years that they're funding it. So in your proposal, sometimes they'll ask for you to describe how you plan to sustain the program. It's good to put even if they don't ask. And then matching funds. Sometimes a funder will only fund your organization's project if you can secure someone else as well. So for example, they will say, we'll pay 50% if you can find someone else to pay for the other half. In-kind contributions are typically goods or services and not cash grants. So sometimes they can be used as a match. So for example, Google Ads might give you an in-kind grant for thousands of dollars worth of free advertising. So that would be an in-kind contribution. So we're getting close to the last slide here. So sorry if we can move on. Now we're going to just chat a little bit about evaluation. So this is, I think, as a new grant writer, always the toughest thing to put in your proposal. And I wanted to simplify it for you so that it's clear as can be how to write your objectives and outcomes, because evaluation is very important. And of course, they're going to be evaluating your evaluation plan when they decide whether they want to fund you. So I put together a very basic program. It's using a dental hygiene for homeless teens program as our example. And so when you're putting together a goal for that program, the goal is going to be more of a giant goal that is similar to the mission of your organization, if not the mission of your organization, which you may or may not be able to accomplish during the term of the grant. Now, the objective is sort of like a mini goal that you could potentially or probably will end up achieving during the grant period. And so in this case, the objective is to distribute 50 toothbrushes to homeless youth. So then the outcome, which is something you can measure, and it's related to that objective in particular, is that by a certain date, your nonprofit will have distributed 50 toothbrushes to 50 homeless youth. So usually you will want to have, they will ask for multiple objectives and outcomes. And they're also going to ask, how are you going to measure those outcomes? So some of the tools that can be used for measuring outcomes includes client testimonials, pre and post surveys, or just even some simple record keeping about how many people were served through that grant. So if we can move on to the last slide, we have come to the end. But Janelle and I would really like to thank everyone for being here, and we hope that you will all do one thing every day that scares you, whether it's reaching out to a funder, trying to learn a new skill, or asking a friend or colleague to proofread your work. We have left our LinkedIn links here if you want to get in touch with us, and definitely want to thank the Junior League again for inviting us to host this webinar. And I'll turn it over to Katie now if she had any questions pop up.
Thank you so much for the great information. There was 3 questions that popped up. The first question is, it says, hi there, I'm very new to grant writing. I was wondering if you could use 2 grants for the same project, or if they are usually strict about only using 1 grant for one specific project.
I can jump in there. For the garden, like I mentioned, we have the prospectus document that we use, and we recycle some of the content in there when applying for grants. So if we're applying, let's say for Miss Smarty Plants, which is our youth education program, in our grant, we try to keep it general, but also specific. And what I mean by that is when we're approaching the funder, we might say, one of our deliverables is to 10 family field trips at the garden and give 5 assemblies within school districts that are Title I. we then might apply to another funder and repeat to meet those same deliverables. If both funders were to come back and say, yes, we want to fund 10 schools and field trips, and the other funder said, yes, we do too, the garden would look at it and say, yes, our educator was able to do 20 field trips. So we could meet the deliverables for both those grants. So we would accept both of them. However, let's say this is a capital project and the garden was seeking funding for a fence. And let's say we don't know if this funder is going to come through. So we submit a couple applications for the fence. And let's say one of the funders comes back and says, yes, here you go, you've been awarded. And then a second funder comes back and says, yes, we'd also like to fund the fence. This is where relationship building comes in, and it's really important to know your program officer. I would give them a call and let them know that we are so appreciative of their gift. We actually had another funder step up and already award funds to cover that project. But once the fence is in, we're going to need to put in a new pathway. And I would look at other fundable items in there. And then usually the person will allow us, the foundation will allow us to submit an addendum. And so we turn in the addendum and then continue there. Or if they weren't interested, we would return the grant funds. Renee, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, it sounds good. I would say sometimes when I've done the budgets, I'll have two different line items. I'll have one funder who's funding the same project, but they're funding, these items. And then the other one is funding these other items. And so then that way, when the program, we're doing the reporting and the receipts, it's very clear that we're going to submit the receipts for the shovels to this program, but the other receipts for the buckets to the other one, so that you certainly wouldn't want to go back and have them find out that you were giving both of them the copy of the shovel receipts, if that makes sense.
All right, ready for the next question?
Sure.
It says, because JLSD leadership changes every year, it's hard to get accurate, meaningful, measurable that a particular grant might need. What do you recommend to better improve our data input, organization of that data, and any other ways to gather measurables without having to ask too many people?
Well, I would say data is very important, and you definitely want to put systems in place. For the garden, we work with each of our department heads, and everyone knows how important data is to continue the sustainability of our programs. We don't update our data every month or every quarter, but we update it in line with our fiscal year. And so before we come, up to the new year, we get everyone together, we get in our group huddle and we let everybody know what information we need. And it's just part of the cycle where each department is keeping track of their own numbers. Then the development department consolidates those numbers. We have a cheat sheet in our grants folder internally, which is like numbers at a glance. So we can just refer to them really quickly. And then we also typically produce a document toward the end of the year that's a public document that we can share with other folks. But I would say, regardless of the changes that are happening, you probably do want to create some kind of system to make sure those are getting tracked.
And I would say regarding Junior League, I definitely could see that being a challenge. You have your chair-elects for different councils like community. And so if somebody is going to definitely have a 2-year term, and even before they start serving that term, if they've kind of willing to spearhead one of these initiatives, if you get a grant, then that would be helpful. And then as people are selecting, which committees they want to be on, you could say, well, this committee is focusing on this grant funded project. And so the committee term might actually be 2 years. So I don't know if there's a way Junior League would be open to that. So you could have some consistency on who is helping deliver the program. But that's just a couple ways that might help.
Thank you. That's great advice. The next question is, can you share your thoughts about how to connect with big funders who are hard to reach? In other words, how do I get invited to apply for grants in the first place?
That's a great question. There's over 80,000 foundations in the US, and 90% of those foundations don't have websites. So it can be really important to utilize some kind of grant search tool like Renee was talking about earlier with Grant Watch or one of the others, Candid, Foundation Center, to help kind of uncover what some of those grants are. You can also connect with different local foundations like the San Diego Foundation, subscribe to their e-newsletter. I read it religiously to see what new funding opportunities have come out. Then last but certainly not least, I would look at your records, dive in and see if you've submitted other applications, if you have a grants calendar, if there's some prospective grant applications that maybe you haven't had an opportunity to get to, or if you've been declined in the past and want to reach out, build a relationship, and leverage those board member relationships. Each time we have a new board member, or if we have our development committee that's in place, I like to meet with each of my development committee members every year, and we talk about networking. I have a worksheet that I have them do that talks about all their different areas and spheres of influence, whether it's government relations, foundation relations, individual gifts, corporate sponsorship leads. And I can refer to that worksheet to see what board members have relationships where. And that can be really helpful for help to kind of like identify those larger gifts.
And bringing it back to the Junior League too, I think I've seen people do this on the Facebook page where someone might be applying for a job with a specific company like Qualcomm. And Qualcomm's another one. I think you have to be invited to submit a proposal with them. They just don't take a cold application. So you might want to throw it out to the Junior League and say, hey, does anybody work at Qualcomm? And you be willing to talk to me about this grant we're looking into with them. But yeah, it definitely, in an ideal world, they have a great website, they have a program officer's email and phone number there, and they'll gladly talk to you. And many of them are that way, but others definitely are harder to reach. So you have to do some pretty good PI work to figure out how to get a hold of them.
And I would add too, like, don't get discouraged. You might apply the first time and that first proposal might be a no, but they might just be getting to know your organization. If you're able to talk to that program officer, get them in for a tour over time, you might be able to turn that no into a yes.
And building on that too is if they ever offer you the chance to get feedback or request to get feedback, always do. That's your chance to do some more relationship building and then find out if their priorities are going to continue to be the same. And a lot of times, it's just like, oh, there were so many great proposals, it was so hard to decide. But sometimes you can get some, like just yesterday, Janelle got some really, really great feedback from a funder, which we're grateful for. They're not funding us, but it definitely might change how we move forward with them and others.
All right, the next question is, it says, I am a newly hired development coordinator for a local community theater that is otherwise fully volunteer run. We've had some success with grants over the years, but it's when a board member or volunteer has a connection or ability to write a grant. I've never been a development professional before. Where do I start? Researching grants. We have one program which is doing shows. Should I make a prospectus? And I'm part-time as well, so I'm trying to prioritize what to do first.
Do you want to take it?
I'd say yes, knowing your program is definitely a great first step, and to be able to collect the information that you need. Every year before we start a new fiscal year and a new grant cycle, I always like to do research first and then collect all the documents and put them in one place My next step would be to get my grant calendar going. And I know Renee provided an example template of a grant calendar. And I would start researching different grants. I would subscribe to channels like the San Diego Foundation. I might join some of those calls like Fundraising Fridays or the Grant Roundtable. And they share what funders are coming to those meetings. So you can take a look and see, okay, next month's meeting is a funder who focuses on homelessness. That's not relevant to the garden, so I might skip that meeting. But the next one, they might have areas for people and children to play, which would be very relevant to the garden. So you can really look at how you're spending your time and picking and choosing, what organizations you're building relationships with. And once as you have your grant calendar in place, you can look at what months are busier and what months you might have a little bit of a lull, which helps with that prioritization.
I would say too, refer back when, this is getting recorded, but if you go back to the pie chart and see all the different ways you could be bringing in income to your organization, there might be some things that would be easier for you as a very part-time development director. You might want to have a campaign. I know we've used Classy before, and a lot of people, I think some people at the Junior League even work there, that might be easier than trying to apply for a complicated grant that would require a lot of reporting.
Renee is absolutely right. One of the downsides to grants is that they're very time consuming. And for nonprofits, the vast majority get 70% of their charitable donations from individual gifts. So that might be a better spot to spend more time.
All right, we got 2 more questions. It says, Janelle, this is for you. It says, how do you ask for salaries for the persons that work at the nonprofit? We don't have problem looking for grants to fund our programs, but we have difficulty getting grants to fund everyday needs, like insurance, accounting, salaries for the director, or any other everyday needs, including they have a bank account themselves. Sometimes I have to fund the bank account myself between the grants.
Insurance, it's not super sexy, and it can definitely be challenging to find funders that want to fund general operating support. For the garden, I know we found that since the pandemic has hit, our foundations and funders that we work with have been much more willing to work with us on having the grants become general operating income instead of programmatic income. So it might be a matter of finding funders that are the right fit. The second piece of that is having a conversation with that funder to say, I reviewed your grant guidelines. I'd love to maybe invite you in to do a tour or to kind of sit down for a virtual coffee chat. And I like to be really honest with the funders about what our real needs are. That maybe our programs, we're seeing a lot of success in getting them funded, but without the general operating revenue, we can't have an education program without an educator. So sometimes just having those real conversations, I found to be really helpful. And even if in the past we've submitted for one program or project, by telling them what our greatest need is, sometimes you're able to help influence the next application. And then I guess on that as well, when we've applied for our education funding, sometimes we phrase it differently too. So instead of saying we're applying for salaries for education staff, we might phrase it as we are applying for 10 field trips. Of course, in order to do the field trip, the cost is to have someone facilitating that field trip. So I think you might be able to look at your messaging as well. You want to be straightforward, but messaging is also key.
And just to add on too, I think, one of the upsides of the pandemic is there have been a lot of grants out there just to stimulate your business, and they know like how much everyone is suffering. So so it is a nice time just to be able to ask for general operating.
Right, there's the county relief grant, which is for general operating. which I know some of the districts have dried up, but I believe there's some funding still available for some districts. There is the statewide relief grant that has come out, which is also for emergency funding. And then for any organizations that have applied for a PPP loan, I've heard that a portion of that could be forgivable and turned into a grant. So those are, 3 examples right there of some general operating resources.
The next question is, we just received our nonprofit status, so there is no financial 990s to audit or history to provide. What is the best way to answer this question for funders?
I would check with the program officers and see if they'll even accept a grant from you without it. You might just have to wait a couple years and work on those other pieces of the pie that were in your fundraising plan until you're ready. But there are some funders out there who like giving seed money. So even when you're doing your searches in those portals, put in the keyword seed money, and see what comes up. And so those people would be probably more open to funding a brand new program. But a lot of them do want to see some history. So, it might be a year or two before you're really ripe for applying for grants.
All right, our last question is, what are your recommendations for small organizations that do not have a dedicated grant writer and rely on development staff to write all of their grants in addition to the rest of their jobs?
That was me for a really long time. I was a one-stop shop until we ended up bringing in more money, and it got to a point where I couldn't, or I was struggling to keep up with demand, which, by the way, is a really great problem to have, and was able to expand the team, bring on Renee, bring on a development coordinator, but that can take time. So for me, as that one development professional, it was really important to take a look at where I was going to have the most impact. The majority of our gifts were coming from major donors. So spending the most time, they say there's that 80-20 rule where 80% of your income comes from 20% of your revenue stream. So just focusing on those areas that are going to have the biggest impact first. And then slowly over time, hopefully the program continues to grow, and then you can bring in additional resources.
And you can look at your board members too, see if someone wants to volunteer to do it.
Thank you so much, Janelle and Renee, for helping us today and giving us all this wonderful information. On behalf of the JLSD and the Community Partner Outreach Committee, our lovely presenters and myself, we'd like to thank you so much for being here. We hope that you found all this information helpful. Our next workshops upcoming are the 3rd chapter, which is going to be March and April 2021. The topic will be how nonprofits can build relationships with board members and better engage them in fundraising. The 4th chapter is going to be in May or June of 2021, and that topic will be creating a successful marketing campaign for your nonprofit. Thank you all so much for joining us, especially our panelists. We hope you have a great weekend and good luck with your grant writing. Thank you.